In today's video, we're going to cover private endpoints, specifically around doing private endpoints for Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. So if you're interested in what private endpoints are, how they work, and how you can implement them in a real world scenario, then please carry on watching. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Neil McLaughlin, aka the VirtualmanC. On this channel, we cover the latest news around Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, Nerdio, Intune, end user computing, Azure, and much, much more. So I guess the question is, why am I making this video? Well, every day, and I mean pretty much every day, I come across private endpoints. And the reason why we do that is because basically private endpoints are a way of locking down your Azure environment. Okay, so by default, when you create a resource within Azure, be it an app service, storage account, anything like that, if you just use the default settings, it's going to be accessible publicly. Okay, it means that anyone can just access that resource. Now obviously if it's got credentials or something, and they'll need those to get access to it, but it's still available on the public internet as per se. Okay, so a common method which customers use is to basically lock down the resources using private endpoints. And what a private endpoint actually does, it actually makes that resource only available to you on your internal network, right? So say for example, I've got a website, right? So by default, if I create a website and I just use the default settings, that website is going to be accessible by everybody in the world. Same as a storage account, okay? If they know the URL or if they know the storage blob details, they can access that storage account if you don't have any further authentication turned on. So what we can do with private endpoints, we can just restrict who can actually access that resource, and that's normally on your internal network, okay? You specify specific VNets and subnets that you can access it from. So let's have a go look in a bit more detail about that, actually how that actually works. Right, so if you just have a look here, so this is a very simple diagram. So I was looking for a diagram which would explain it well. So imagine this is your kind of on-prem environment, okay? And we have a resource here. So this resource could be a storage account, it could be an app service, whatever. So by default, that will be accessible by everybody, okay? Now what we can now do is we can basically say, okay, we've got this Azure Virtual Network, and what happens is when we create a private endpoint, we essentially create a NIC, okay, and that private endpoint is actually a network card. We inject that into the resource, and then that means that that resource now has a private IP address, okay? It doesn't have a public IP address anymore, it has a private IP address, and that means it's only accessible from within inside the network, okay, that subnet is a member of, or that VNet, right? So that may be your internal on-prem environment, or it may be only within your Azure environment, but essentially we're just locking down access to only available within inside your network. Okay, so that's essentially what a private endpoint is. So we're going to see that shortly. So essentially what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the Azure portal, and we're going to actually implement private endpoints for Nerdio, right? We're going to do it two ways. The first method I'm going to do is via the script automation, just to show you what that looks like, and then just to say you learn it more, I'm actually going to go through and do all this stuff manually as well, right? So we're basically going to create a private endpoint for an app service. We're going to create a private endpoint for a key vault service, and then we're going to create a private endpoint for a SQL service, right? And also a storage account. And then we're going to basically show how all those things work, and what happens when you try to access the website publicly without those private endpoints. Okay, so that's the goal for today's video. If it sounds interesting, please carry on watching. If it doesn't, please feel free to watch something else. But yeah, the goal of this video is to teach you what private endpoints are, but more importantly how to use those with Nerdio, because it's something which comes up pretty much every day, if not at least once a week, where a customer's asking me, okay, how can we lock our Nerdio instance down using private endpoints, and this is what I'm going to teach you today. All right, let's get going. All right, so I'm in the Nerdio console, and what we're going to do now is say, first of all, we're going to use a script to do this. Okay, so we have a scripted action called enable private endpoints, right? And this is what I'm going to run. So if we just select that, and we can see here it's basically scripts. It's got some variables inside there, so we're just going to go and run this, and then we're going to input those variables into that script, okay? And then we're going to run that script, and then you'll be able to see what's happening. So if I now just show you what that app service looks like, so if I just open up a URL, portal, and go into my Azure environment, and I will see if I go to my app service. I go to settings and networking, so you can see here at the moment I've got public network access enabled with no access restrictions, okay, and I don't have any VNet integration enabled, and I don't have any private endpoints, right? So this is what we're going to fix now, okay? So we're going to basically lock this down so it's only accessible on the internal network, okay? So let's go back to the script. So basically we're going to run this script, and then we're going to input some details into the script. Okay, so the first thing it's asking me for is the Azure subscription. So this is my Azure subscription, which I'm running this for. It's going to ask for a private VNet name. Okay, so this is the name of the VNet for the private endpoints. Now I've already got the VNet. Okay, so I'm just going to go in here and select that VNet. So this is my networking. So I've got a VNet here. So I'm going to call this WVD Lab VNet. Okay, so I'm going to click copy, and then I'm going to select paste. Okay, so that's the name of my VNet. Okay, and then I've got my VNet address range. So this is the address range of my VNet. So I'm just going to go back here, go to overview. So this is my address space here. Okay, so it's so I'm just going to take that, and I'm just going to copy that into the script. Okay, so that's the address range of my VNet. So in a production environment, you may have a separate VNet for all this stuff, or you may just use existing VNets. It depends on your networking configuration. Okay, and next we need a private endpoint subnet name. Okay, so I'm just going to go here, and then I'm going to give that. So if I go to my subnets, and the one that I generally use is this one here, where it says Nerdio test. Okay, so I'm just going to give that there, so call that Nerdio test. Nerdio test. Okay, so I'm going to go into here. I'm going to call that Nerdio test. Okay, just make sure that's the right one. So Nerdio test. Yeah. Okay. Private endpoint subnet range. So this is the subnet range that we're going to use for the private endpoints. So we'll just go back to our subnet here. We'll see that in here. So the subnet range for this one is this here. So it's 10.0, 10.0.3.0/24. Okay, so make sure you got enough IP addresses, obviously, within the subnet. So we're going to go to here, and then I'm going to put that there. Okay. Now we also need a app service subnet name. The reason being is because we need a separate empty subnet for the app service. Okay, and the reason why we need that is because we're basically going to do VNet integration, right, for the app service. So that has to be a dedicated subnet specifically for the app service. Okay, so if I go here, you can see here I've got this subnet down here, which is called app service SE, and that's the one that I'm going to use, right? So that just needs to be a /28 subnet. Okay, so this is the one that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to basically just use that one. So it's asking me for the subnet name. So the subnet name is going to be app service SE. So let me just select that. Yep, I'm going to copy that from here. Okay, so subnet name is going to be app service SE. App service subnet range. So this is going to be this one here, so 10.0. So I'm going to put this in here. Okay. Now, this is really important, and it's around your DNS configuration. Okay. So within private endpoints, there's two ways you can do the DNS. You can have the DNS either let Azure sort it all out. Okay. So Azure can host the DNS zone itself. That's a solution which most people go for. Or if customers want more control, sometimes they host the zones internally, right? So if you are basically letting Azure host the DNS zones, normally you'll just refer those DNS requests off to the Azure DNS servers and let them sort it out. If you're hosting the zones internally, then essentially what you need to do, you need to basically create the DNS records manually. Or what is quite common with customers is they actually have an Azure policy which is when the private endpoint NIC is actually created, it will actually go and create a DNS record for you. Okay, so I see that quite often as well. So it's really important that you know what DNS configuration you've got, and whether you're using Azure hosted DNS zones or whether you're hosting it internally. Okay. So it's asking for an existing DNS zones resource group. So I'm just going to go let it create one itself. Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to leave that blank, right? So if you have DNS zones configured for use for new private endpoint specified here, the script will achieve the existing DNS zones and link it to private network. Okay, but we don't need to do that, so we're not doing that. Okay, and if your DNS zones are in the separate zones, okay, yeah, we don't need to do that. So make scripted action storage account private. So if you also want to lock down the scripted action storage account, we can do that as well. Okay. And what it will do then, it will actually go and create what we call a hybrid worker VM, because once we lock those scripted actions down, it means that they won't be accessible via the Azure automation account, right? So we need to create this thing called a hybrid worker, and that will basically then sort of proxy the scripted actions. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to create this now. I'm just going to keep this false. Okay, we're just going to do the basics here. If you need to do peernet VNet ID, so if we need to link the VNet with the other resources, we can do that. We're not going to do that. We can also make the Azure Monitor stuff private as well, but you need to be careful here against what other resources you're using for Azure Monitor. So again, we'll just keep that for false now, and also make app service private. So I'm actually going to select yes, true for that. Okay. Because we want to do that because this will lock down the actual Nerdio console, so it's only accessible internally. Okay, so I think we're all good there. So basically what we're going to do there is, so just let me clarify what we've done here. So we've got a private link VNet name, which is my existing VNet here. We have a VNet address subnet range. We've got a private endpoint subnet range, which is this one here. Okay. And that's the subnet which is going to create all the private endpoints in. Then we've got app service subnet name, so this is this one down here, and that's the subnet which is going to create for the VNet integration. Okay, so what is VNet integration? So essentially, private endpoint is for incoming communication, right? So if I try and talk to that resource, it's talking to the resource, right? And it will use the private NIC for communication for that. Now, what about outbound? So by default, the app service, okay, does outbound traffic via public IPs, even if you have private endpoints enabled, right? So your input traffic will be private endpoint, your output traffic will still go out via the public IP addresses. So we need to create something called VNet integration, and I'll show you this when we do this stuff manually. But basically, VNet integration will force the communication outbound through that private NIC, okay? And it needs to be a dedicated subnet, right? And that's why it has to be its own subnet, right? So that's why we're doing that. Okay, all right. So now we've got those details, and we are just going to go and click run now. If you want to, you can pass AD credentials stuff if you're using domain join host for doing stuff like this, but we don't need to. So just going to click that out. So can I click run now? And that's going to go away, and it's basically going to use the Azure automation account to actually go ahead and run that script, and then that will configure all the private endpoints and stuff. So we'll be back shortly. We'll see how that goes, and then what we're going to do, we're actually going to go and delete all those private endpoints, and then we're going to go and do this stuff manually, just so you can see what's happening under the hood as well. Okay, back shortly. If you want to actually look at what's happening, you can actually go over to automation accounts. Okay, so if you just go into your Azure portal and just click on automation accounts, and if you just click on the runbooks and then go to jobs, you should see the job here and the scripted action. Okay, and if you just click on that, you'll see all the settings that we put in there as well. Okay, that's still queued up, so it's going to take a few minutes for it to kick in, but we'll be back in a second. We'll show you the progress, and that'll be able to see in there as well. So yeah, if you ever troubleshooting stuff around stuff not working, or you want to actually see what's happening in the back end, we can do that. You can see here the script URI, so it's created that script using storage account, and it's using like a SAS URL for that as well. So yeah, we'll be back shortly when this is populated with some data, and I'll be able to see what it's actually doing. All right, I am officially abandoning the scripted action method. The reason being, I've had a lot of issues. So let me just walk you through some of the issues that I've had, just to try and sort of help you. So first of all, I had issues with the hybrid worker role. So I've job suspended due to limit hybrid worker exceeded. So managed to fix that eventually, and then I reran it again. Once I fixed that, and then there's an other error which popped up. Let me just find exception. Yep, I had an issue with my DPS storage account, which I've got past that. I've had to manually create a DPS storage account because this was quite an old version of Nerdio, so got past that one. And then the latest error is it's basically saying it can't find the SQL server, which I know the SQL server is definitely in there. So I presume it's some issue with this code here, because this recently got updated, and it's looking at some of the Intune inside its app service, and I think it's like returning a wrong return code or something, because the SQL server is definitely in there. So yeah, I don't really have time to troubleshoot all that. I'll need to do that separately offline, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and do all this stuff manually, right? Because you'll see how quick it is to do this when we do it manually compared to spending the last 2 hours troubleshooting why that script isn't working, which is why I always do it manually, because it just works. Right. So basically what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do the scripted actions. So we're going to go ahead and create the private endpoints, okay, and then we're going to enable the VNet integration as well. So first thing that we'll do is we'll do the VNet integration of the app service, okay. So what I'm going to do here is just go to find the app service, and then for this demo we're just going to do the basic core Nerdio stuff. There is obviously stuff around the Copilot, we've got stuff around the sort of the application stuff, Unified Application Manager, and then obviously all the newer stuff as well. But for simplicity, maybe in a further video I'll do the rest of them, but for this one I'm just going to do it for the app. Okay, so first thing, always make sure that the app service is working before you start to begin, so you know it's not an issue with networking or something, or not working in the first place. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enable VNet integration. So all I need to do is go over to VNet, virtual network integration. Okay, so we're just going to configure this. So we're going to select add virtual network integration. Okay, we're going to select our network, and then we're going to select network, and then we're going to select the subnet. Okay, so it's this one here, which I'm going to use, which is the app service subnet, right? So it needs to be an empty subnet, so it's automatically enabled me to select this one. Okay, so I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to click on connect. Okay, so that's basically going to create the VNet integration for us. Right, and basically what this also means as well, from this moment onwards all the traffic is being routed out via a firewall, right? So if you've got a routing table with attached to this VNet or subnet, that means once we enable this, all the Nerdio application traffic is going to go through the firewall. So you need to make sure that you've got the required firewall rules in place, and I put those in the link, a website URL to show you what those are. Okay, all right, so now we go back, we should now have the VNet integration, so outbound traffic configuration. Okay, so now as I mentioned, what we're doing is we're going out via the private network. Right, if I just go to refresh the console, just make sure that everything's still working. So yep, we are looking good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go and basically create the private endpoint. Okay, so if I go to networking, so go to here, go to networking, where it says public network that's enabled, app assigned, and we'll go private endpoints. Okay, so I'm going to go to here, I'm going to click on add, and I'm going to go to express. Okay, so I'm going to call this Nerdio app PE. Okay, we're going to select the network which you want it in. So for my network, it's WVD Lab, and I'm going to select my subnet. So I'm using Nerdio Test as my subnet. Now this is what I was talking about before about the DNS stuff, right? So if you're using your own DNS servers, basically we select no. Okay, if we want to enable Azure to manage it for us, we just select yes. Okay, and you can see here the private endpoint will be integrated with the existing DNS zone private link.azurewebsites.net in the resource groups WD Lab. Okay, so that's one that I've already got set up. So I'm just going to click the OK button, and that's going to go away, and it will now basically create that private endpoint. Okay, so let's just go back, give that a second. See here, that's creating the private endpoint. Okay, so that's now created successfully. Okay, so you can see here we've got a Nerdio app, and if we go and have a look, we can actually see the private endpoint here. Okay, so this is what it's attached to. Okay, all right, so now we've got that. Next thing we need to do, let's just check the app service is still working, see if it is or not. Okay, things are still looking good, I think. Yep. Okay, so that's all looking good. So basically we've now got a private endpoint coming in and out. Okay, so the private endpoint will be for the incoming traffic, the VNet integration will be for the outgoing traffic. Okay, all right, so next thing we need to do is the key vault. Right, so if we go to my service, go to key vaults. Okay, so again we just need to find which is the Nerdio key vault. So for my environment, it's going to be this one. So it always begins with NOW-F. Okay, I'm just going to go to here. I'm going to go to networking, and here we can see we've got private endpoint connections. So I'm just going to select create. Again, going to select my resource group, so instance name, so this is going to be Nerdio Key Vault PE. Okay, select next. I'm going to select my resource type. So for here, we want to just type in key vault, so it's this one here, so the bottom one. We're going to select the resource, so this is the actual key vault that we want to use, so it's this one here. Okay, NOW-app key vault, and then a sub resource which will be the vault. Okay, so that's what we want to use. Virtual network, and again we select the same Nerdio test subnet that we want to use for this as well, so it's remembered those details for me. And then we're going to select dynamic allocate IP address. Go to DNS, so again we need to tell it which DNS zone, so it knows it can already see that DNS zone from within there as well. Okay, so we've got one called private link.vault call. That was the step. So same rules apply. If you have manual DNS, just select no. If we integrate with the Azure DNS zone, select yes. Okay, all right, so I'm going to select that, click review and create. Okay, and then we're going to click the create button. Okay, so that's now going to go and create the private endpoint for the key vault. So if you want to see the Nerdio documentation for all this, you can go to this URL. I'll put that in the link. But it tells you, it goes through all the steps which I'm just doing here as well. So we've got storage accounts, SQL, app service, and key vault. Okay, and so these are the ones that we're going through at the moment. All right, so okay, so that's now done. So we've done the key vault. So now we're going to do the SQL. Okay. So again, we just do the same thing. So we go to SQL, SQL servers. Okay, we find the SQL server which we've got, which is this one here. Again, settings, networking, and then we're going to go to private access, create a private endpoint. Go to resource details. So I'm going to call this Nerdio SQL PE. Okay, resource next. Target sub-resource, again it's automatically found that as a SQL server. The next version network, dynamic allocate, so same thing, same screens, and just go here. Again it's already found my private link.database.windows.net. Okay, so this is the resource group that it sits in. Again, same rules apply. If you're using your own DNS, just select no, click tags. If you want to put tags on there, you can do. Review and create, and then select the create button. Okay, so again, that's now going to go ahead and create the private link resources for that SQL server. Okay, so that's now completed. So we go to resources. So now, just to recap, we've got private endpoints for the app service, Key Vault, and the SQL service. Okay, so if I just go back to here now and just to make sure stuff is still working. Okay, so we're looking good. So that seems to be all working fine. Now, what we need to do now, if you really want to be extra secure, is obviously just make sure that we are using the private endpoints for all the traffic. So how do we do that? So basically, what we can do is we go back to all the resources. So if I go to, I'm going to do the Key Vault first. So go to Key Vaults, and then if we go to the Nerdio one again, go to networking, and you can see here, so it's still saying allow from public access from our network. So if you've got like audits and stuff running, so if you've got like audits software running, it's basically looking at these configurations. Even though we created a private endpoint, we still need to force that traffic using the private endpoint. So to do that, we basically disable public access. Okay, and then we're going to allow trusted Microsoft services to bypass this firewall, right? So click apply for that, and that's basically just going to force that traffic over that private endpoint. Okay, you can also do allow from public access and specific virtual networks and IP addresses, and what you can do in that scenario is you can basically say allow public access. Maybe you've got an admin workstation or something that you want to use, or you don't want to go down the full private endpoint route. You just want to select specific networks, maybe your on-prem network route or something like that. But ideally, we want to do disable public access completely. All right, so that's the Key Vault. So next, do the SQL. So the SQL one's actually a bit different. So I'll show you. So if you go to the SQL, go to networking. So we've got public access, so you can actually do it from selected networks, and that will actually use like the firewall, but it will allow Azure services only to this server as well, right? So we can actually restrict what IP subnets. Now, what we can do if you want to as well, in this firewall list rule, we can basically add in only the Nerdio app service IP addresses, right? Only the outbound IP addresses. So if you go to the article, it actually tells you how to do that here. So we get the outbound IP addresses and then add those into the firewall list. Okay, so that's another way of doing it, but I think the current status is okay, right? Because we've got selected networks, right? So it's based on the firewall list below. Okay, and in here we've allow Azure services and resources to access the service. So we're basically saying, hey, we're going to allow any Azure resource in our subscription to access this server. But so if you wanted to take it one step further, you could just add in all the individual IP addresses, and what that would do, that would restrict only access to the SQL server from the app service. Okay, so only the Nerdio app service could talk to that SQL server if we added in the outbound IP addresses in there. Okay, but we can see we've got the private endpoints connected in there as well. All right, so next thing is the app service. Okay, so if we go to the moment, I'm on my home PC at home, right? I'm not connected until VPN into Azure or anything, so I can access this. Obviously, I authenticate. But what we can now do is I can go into my app service. So app services, okay. Let me find that. Go to networking. Okay, so we've got private endpoints. So we've got public access enabled from all networks. Okay. Now watch this. If I set that to disabled, okay, yep, that's fine. What that basically is going to mean is I'm locking down access to Nerdio console from only from within inside the VNet, right? So watch what happens now, because I basically disabled public access. Okay, so if I go to my Nerdio Manager console now, I click the refresh button. Okay, so now we've public access disabled. Okay, if I go to the web app, it's now saying forbidden. Okay, because I basically turned around to it and said, I'm only going to allow you access from the internal network. Okay, so obviously you need to make sure you're like VNet peering in place and stuff if you want to access it from certain management subnets. But at the moment, I've basically locked down the access, so you have to go into the network to actually view the Nerdio console. Okay, so yeah, so that's literally how you do all the private endpoints. It doesn't take long to do. Okay, I guess the next thing is the storage accounts. So generally what we do for the storage accounts is a similar thing. So if I go to so let me find one of the storage accounts and I can show you. To go to storage accounts, so obviously you use the Nerdio ones. So these will normally begin with like CSS or DPS. And what we generally do there, or STN. So what I can do there, same thing. Just go to settings, networking, and then just create the private endpoint connections from in there. Now, what you sometimes have to do, especially if you're sitting in a separate subnet or VNet for your session host, because the storage accounts need to be accessible by the Nerdio app service itself, plus also the session host. Okay, so if, for example, the session host is sitting in a separate VNet, which is sometimes happens because you have like management VNets and subnets, what we'd normally do in that instance, if you don't have like all the VNet routing in place, you can basically go in and select add existing virtual network. Yeah. And that allow me to select all my different VNets that are available to me within my subnet. Okay, so that's how you can do that on the storage accounts, and that rule applies to everything else. But the only thing which requires external access normally is the storage accounts. So from a communication perspective, the app service, Key Vault, and SQL all just need to be able to communicate with each other internally, and that's why we create the private endpoint connections for them, because it means no traffic is leaving externally. It's just internal traffic communication between those services. Okay, all right, so that's how you troubleshoot it. So that's how you implement it. I'm just going to give you one more tip, and this is really useful for troubleshooting. Okay, so I'm just going to allow access to my app servers again so I can show you this. So one of the most useful tools for troubleshooting it if it's not working is to basically use something called TCP ping. Okay, so what I can do from here, so let's take, for example, look at the Key Vault. Okay, so if I go to Key Vaults, and if I find the name of the Key Vault, so I go to overview. So this is the Vault URL. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. Vault-Azure.net. Okay, so what you'll see, so if I ping this from my machine at home, okay, I get this. Yeah, so I'm getting a reply from the public IP address because I'm pinging it externally. Okay, if I do the same thing, so CCP ping from the app service console, so you can get to this by going to the console or the app service. So you go to development tools and then console. I just allow at 443. Okay, watch what happens now. Basically it'll come back, but it should reply from the private IP address, so that's telling me I can get to it. So I'm going to go to NS lookup, and then that. Okay, so key thing here, the name is responding on private link.vaultcore.azure.net. Okay, so that means it's responding to the private IP address, not the public IP address. Okay, and it's responding to 10.0 to 3.18. Yeah, so if I just compare that to what I'm getting from my public machine, okay, same resource, yeah, but internally it's responding to the private IP address, externally it's responding to the public IP address. Okay, and I've locked it down so I can only access this key vault from my internal network. Okay, so really key thing there. So if you're troubleshooting it and it's not working, or you want to make sure it is working, that's just a quick test that you can do to make sure that we're actually using the private endpoint. Okay. Alright, so yeah, that's all I wanted to show you today. So that's how you lock down the basic Nerdio components using private endpoints. Yeah, it's really important. I try to do this pretty much with every customer because you don't want to have those services available on the public internet. Now, obviously, you still need to authenticate to them. Yeah, it's not as though anyone can just access them and start logging on and doing stuff. But they are accessible from the public internet. Okay, so if you want to stop that, just create private endpoints. Alright, so that's it from this week's video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that after watching this week's video, you'll be, number one, you'll know what private endpoints are, you'll see how to create them, but also more importantly, you'll know how you can lock down Nerdio using private endpoints to make your environment a lot more secure. So yeah, as I said, this question comes up pretty much every week, so I'm hoping to use this video that I can send out to existing customers, and happy private endpointing. Alright, that's it for this week, and I will see you next week. Thank you, bye bye.